record now. There. Okay, so I'm going to hand this over to Doug Schonberg, who will continue to share his experiences on capital campaigns. This is part 2 from the session that we had last week. Go ahead, Doug.
Thank you, Karen. I've screen shared, and Karen just has some notes for you at the beginning on protocols. And because we're a small group, some of these won't be quite as important because we can chat a little bit more freely. But there definitely will be Q&A at 2 points in the presentation today. So feel free to hold your questions until then.
And feel free to type any questions into the chat. I can make sure, so that you don't forget them, I can make sure that they get asked at the end. This is just some of the contact information for Jim, Maggie, myself, and Heather Chappell, the program coordinator. We're all happy to answer your questions afterwards. And a reminder that the webinar will be recorded and the slides and notes will be posted at presbyterian.ca/leadership webinars, but we'll also send you out a link to direct you to that.
Great. Thanks, Karen. So as Karen has said, we're in part 2 of a 2-part webinar on capital campaigns, and I call it considerations because I would not consider myself to be an expert, but I do have lived wisdom and hard-earned experience that comes out of running 3 of them. Just a reminder of my context and my point of view. I did serve as minister at Chippewa Presbyterian Church from 1998 to 2020, and that's where these capital campaigns happened. I'm back to school now, working on a doctorate, Doctor of Practical Theology, dealing with leadership issues, and have created a small consulting practice called Relational Systems Consulting. So you can find me. The website is actually just relationalsystemsconsulting.com if you're looking for me further. And as I said, presenting from experienced learning, not as a fundraising professional. The Chippewa context, just so you can sort of imagine where and what it is I'm speaking about, we had an attendance range of about 110 to 170 on Sunday mornings, with an annual budget just approximately about $200,000 a year. We had a renovation project that was 8 times our annual budget, $1.6 million. The renovation was completed in 2010, and we just finished, or the church just finished the mortgage in 2022. So after 14 years, debt-free.
Doug, just a quick question. When you say 200,000 was your budget, was most of that coming from people's offerings, or were there any other sources of income?
There was primarily donation, but there was some endowment. So our mission giving is from the endowment, and that was incorporated in that budget. But it wasn't a huge difference. Like, you know, those were our people.
Yeah, great, thanks.
Yep. So last week we talked about reasons and research, sort of doing the homework behind a capital campaign before you even enter one. Today we're going to talk a little bit about more practical logistics of actually running a campaign. The first half I want to talk about, or the first however long it takes, talk about the question, should we hire a fundraising or a capital campaign consultant? This is a question that we had to ask ourselves. Should we be seeking professional assistance for what we're attempting to do here? And so what I've done is just listed some considerations for you, for your team, to consider, things to think about as you are wrestling with this question. First consideration, is there a major benefactor in your congregation? Some of our congregations have people with a significant capacity for generosity, and it is possible that they could be approached, and sometimes they're willing to cover 50, 75%, 90% of a major capital expenditure. And if those people exist in your context, you might not need a major capital campaign, and certainly not a consultant. But I would advise you that all of the reasons and research work that you would do for a congregation-wide campaign remains as significant for presenting to a one person or family as it is for presenting to a congregation. People with high capacity giving have certain expectations for homework being done, excellence of research, and knowing what the purpose and plan is for what's being done. So I have seen congregations that they haven't had to do an extensive consultant hired capital campaign because there has been a major benefactor present in the congregation. But basically you're making your case to one person instead of however many are in your church. Think about the size of your campaign. The greater the amount that you're seeking to raise, the more helpful the coaching becomes. Things like leadership training, directing your volunteers, guiding your campaign team, building momentum, and also just helping you manage your expectations. We can be sometimes overly optimistic or overly pessimistic, and capital campaign consultant can help manage expectations in a very helpful way. Consider the experience in your congregation. Has your minister or have other individuals been part of capital campaigns before? Do you have congregation members who have experience in fundraising for nonprofits? Would they be willing and are capable of taking a leadership role? If you have those individuals present, then maybe you don't need to hire a capital campaign consultant because they're kind of there already. This is an important one. Cost versus value. And this is probably the most energized conversation you would have with leadership in your context. Expect consultants to ask a fee of between 5 to 10% of the amount to be raised. I have seen consultants claim that with their service, they can help an organization raise double the amount that would be raised without their service. So now you've got a cost versus value equation to be considered. And some churches or contexts, they'll just incorporate the cost of the consultant into the cost of the campaign itself. So as an example, you've got a campaign goal of $500,000. And you're interviewing a campaign fundraising consultant who says, I'm going to charge 5% of that goal. So now you've got a fee of $25,000, which, sounds shocking and, maybe even a little, a barrier. But if the claim that they're making stands, the amount raised without a consultant would be $250,000. Amount raised with a consultant, almost double that. So you've got a cost value ratio, $25,000 to raise an extra $225,000. It's an important consideration. And if you are in a conversation with a potential consultant, these are excellent questions to be built into a dialogue with them. An important thing with hiring a consultant, again, is this management of expectations. I learned that, here's a way to sort of think about a major capital campaign. And this would be sort of a 3-year endeavor. Weak campaigns would raise 1 time your annual budget. A medium campaign, double your annual budget. A strong campaign would raise 3 times your annual budget, again, over a period of 3 years. So if you're having a conversation with a potential consultant, can they confidently lead you through a strong campaign? Do they have examples of where and when they have done this? I would, without hesitation, ask for previous results from contexts that are most similar to yours. Try and seek out that apples to apples comparison. When you're talking or interviewing a potential consultant, you can expect sort of these stages or phases of a program that they bring to you. Typical stages with a consultant. You start with sort of feasibility. they'll look at your donor base and see, you know, what percentage of people are giving what percentage of your annual budget. So, you know, we've always had our 80-20 conversations, right? 20% of the people give 80% of the budget, these kinds of ideas. So they'll do a review of how giving happens in your church, in your context. So that'd be stage one. And out of that feasibility study, they give you a sense of what you could possibly expect to raise. So even that's helpful with managing expectations. And then there's a phase called branding. So this is where you create the story of your campaign. What is it you're asking for? Why are you asking for it? What is the inspiration that is being tapped into to inspire generous giving from your people? So a consultant will help you and coach you to create branding. There's a phase called the quiet launch. This was probably the most helpful thing I ever learned about capital campaigns. The quiet launch is when you go around to key leaders in the congregation, people who are already invested in what it is you're endeavoring to have happen, and asking them to make their commitment before you go public. So if everybody on session has been talking about this forever, and your board of managers, and you've got some key leaders who've been pushing for the changes that you're seeking to make, all of those individuals are approached ahead of the public launch of the campaign and asked to make their pledge amount. And what that does is then when you go to your public launch, you already have, 50% of the amount pledged and raised, so that when you're asking the rest of your donors or potential donors, they believe it can happen because you're already 50% of the way there. So Ken Callahan, I quote him often, but he used to say, people love to give to a winning cause, not a sinking ship. And so if you're already 50% of the way there, this is now a winning cause that you get to be part of. So those are sort of the four stages that are typical. A different consultant may call them different things, but you'll sort of see that pattern happening. Be aware that the consultant doesn't do the footwork for you. They give you the coaching. They meet as a sort of team leader, but you're still going to do the legwork. You're still going to find the printer for the branded materials. You're still going to have to find the graphic designer to put it together. You're still going to have to get the volunteers that go out and do the visiting and make the ask. So they're providing leadership and coaching. They're not providing staffing to do the things that that your campaign committee would do. In terms of finding a consultant, I'm not going to bring any recommendations to you. The fellow that we used in 2006 has passed away. But this is what I would do if I was looking for one. God bless the internet. You can do a Google search on capital campaign, financial consultants, add the word Canada to it, and a list will come through. And you can start exploring that list. We've got all our techniques that we use for all the other things we do, whether it's plumbers for our house or, what kind of bank do you want to use, this kind of thing. So find the referrals. Is there a church in your community that's done a renovation or a capital campaign? Did they use someone? Did they like them? And then it is significant to ensure that it's a Canadian consultant, particularly if you do an internet search. There is a myriad of consultants in the US, but they're in a US context. They're in a context that is different than our Canada Revenue Agency context. And fees are paid in American funds, which means it already costs at least a third more if you're using them. And they pretend, the Americans think they understand Canada. They think it's just another US, but Canadian sensibilities are different. So you do want somebody that is familiar with the Canadian context. And then I would further add a church context. There are a lot of capital campaign fundraisers out there, And again, they'll think church is the same as a hospital. They'll think it's the same as a school or other things. But we know that language at church, posture at church, values at church can be considerably different. And so, if not a church capital campaign consultant, particularly, at least somebody that has experience with churches that would be able to understand those conversations. I've provided you with just some very quick examples of places you can go to read further as a way of prepping your leadership team or your campaign team or the people that are talking about a capital campaign in your context, things to read so that you're brought up to speed before you do an interview with a campaign consultant. 2 of these are Canadian, 2 of them are from the US. The fundamental structures are the same. You'll see the things that I've just talked about there in terms of stages and what they have to offer, fees that are being charged, that kind of thing. But it's a way of getting yourself up to speed on the campaign consultant industry so that you're prepped if you're going to send an email, an inquiry email, if you're going to make a phone call and you're going to ask a few questions, you'll have better questions when you make those calls. So just use those to orient your team to what capital campaign consultants do, how they talk, what they talk about, how much they cost, and just ways that you can be prepared for that conversation. So, considerations on the question, should we hire a capital campaign consultant? Do the research, same message as last week. You may need to hunt for a Canadian church fundraiser. They're not prolific. So you might have to look around, make the phone calls, send out the email inquiries, do get multiple quotes. Just because you found one doesn't mean it's the one. I think affinity is very important. If you don't like the person that you're potentially going to be working with, if you don't enjoy their company or find them at least tolerable, your team's not going to like them. You're going to infuse a spirit of frustration into all your work, and it won't be fun. So affinity is significant. So you know what, even if it's the best price, but you don't like the person, I wouldn't do it. Just remember, you're going to be spending a lot of time with those people, so you want to enjoy it. References, again, this is fairly standard stuff, but sometimes we get intimidated because it's out of our usual context. But you know what? You're purchasing a very expensive service. So ask for follow-up on references, compare price, ask about their strategy. Does that strategy seem to make sense for what your context is? Examples of previous outcomes, and not just good ones. You can send me some of the bad ones. I want to hear what went wrong so I can learn from that. I call that pitfall awareness. Do they have examples of when they under-delivered, and what's their rationale for that? And what can you learn from what they learned when they under-delivered? And then just to reiterate, because it's very important, have a cost versus value mindfulness. The Canadian Presbyterian Church has strong roots in its Scottish history, and that Scottishness sometimes is with humor equated with frugality. And I just remind you that sometimes frugality can be disabling when it is put in the way of leveraging a payment of something for a greater good. So some things are worth spending on. So it's hard in a church context because people will immediately see the cost of the consultant and be like, well, and it's a bill, right? So it's right in front of them. Whereas a end goal of a campaign is ethereal still. It's not tangible, not guaranteed until people make their pledges. and even then not till they fulfill their pledges. So it's a bit of a challenge to have that conversation, particularly with people who are high commitment, high givers, who sort of think everybody thinks the way they do. And that can be a challenge. So that was a tougher conversation, a tougher sell in my context, that this is actually good value because we're going to raise more than we would on our own. And this first campaign that we had was the place where we learned a lot of the things I'm teaching you. So the consultant educated me in many, many ways. Questions? Anything that you would like to follow up on that you've heard me say?
What were your experiences with capital consultants? Did you use ones for all 3 campaigns, for any of the campaigns? Did you like them, or what were?
Yeah, so I'll talk about this in our second section with the campaigns themselves, but we used one for the first one, and then we didn't for the next 2. And I'll share why as we go through. But the first consultant, or having a consultant for that first campaign, was very, very helpful for educating us, for sort of teaching us those 4 stages, or those 4 phases of a capital campaign. And it allowed us to visualize and contextualize what it was that we were doing with understanding.
Great. Dave, did you have a question?
Maybe a silly question, but I don't suppose they give guarantees on the amount you're going to gain with your capital campaign.
No, but a question I would certainly have for a consultant. Some of them charge a flat fee based on your goal. Some do a fee to what is raised. So if their fee is tied to how much gets raised, sometimes the motivation is a little better. So that would be something to explore with a potential consultant. But no guarantees. And to be fair, sometimes people are more generous than you were expecting. So it isn't just, that one goes both ways.
All right, I don't think I see any more questions. Speak up if you raise your, oh no, wait, Barbara has a question.
This isn't a particularly question, but Doug, thank you for this beautiful piece of wisdom. People love to give to a winning cause. And we, in fact, have a sinking ship. So that would be a really good way to reframe the whole campaign. I love it. And the instructions you've given for checking out your consultant are really just the basic ideas that behind hiring anybody. My background's in human resources, so that just sounds like a really good interview process. It's complete, thorough, and very sensible. So thank you for both of those things very much.
That's very encouraging. Thank you, Barbara. One of the mysteries of church life to me has been having people around a table in a church context who are phenoms in their own contexts, professors, entrepreneurs, people in high-level policy places, like smart, industrious, faithful people, and somehow we put them in a church meeting room and everybody gets stupid. Like it's like you folk are far smarter than me. I'm a theology trained person. Like I don't know anything, but for whatever reason, there is sort of a holding back that can happen in a church context, which if I figure that out, I'm going to write a paper because all of the things I'm saying, every one of you is like, how is this guy doing a webinar? Like, this is my job 101. But somehow in church, it's different, it's new. The minister's supposed to know everything, and we lose some of that just basic confidence. So that's, yeah.
And you can't just assume we all know everything, because I'm finding this extremely helpful.
Well, thank you for saying so. But as I present it, don't you have the sense of like, this is kind of common sense, right?
Well, yes, but you have the common sense, right, in this situation, not me. So
Okay,
I can see common sense when I see it, but I don't
I won't
necessarily
belabor.
have
Fair enough. I won't belabor the point, but thank you.
Douglas, I'm not sure what was said in the first webinar, but the thing that resonates with me is that when you go into this kind of a process, you have to have the right people working at the church level. So we were very, very particular in terms of choosing who we wanted on the committee. So we have two committees. One was the fundraising, the one that was supporting the fundraising effort, and the other one was the technical, like the actual interaction with the builder and things like that. We found that to be very helpful because we had action-oriented people, not people who just came to the meeting because for whatever, social reasons or something like that. So that's a point that if that wasn't raised, I'd like to throw it out for a suggestion. The other is that when we went for finding a consultant, we interviewed 3 people. We actually were looking at a 4th one, but that didn't work out well. And we settled on somebody who was fee for service. It was a fixed price, and our total campaign was 1.5 million. And we paid, I think, Lynn, about 12,000, 10 or 12,000. And that was very tightly structured in terms of what she would provide for us. So just a couple of thoughts.
Yeah. Everybody else at this webinar is going to be asking for that referral because that's a great price.
Actually, it was, her fee was $10,000 and she gives a 10% discount to churches. So we paid $9,000.
That is tremendous. You did
And
very
she's the wife of a minister and all she does is churches.
well. There you go.
Well,
So
we'll get Doug to continue on, but I'd love at the end for you to share some of your experiences and stories. If there's anything we can add, I think we can all learn from one another. So this is great.
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, thank you for all of those comments. So those are that's the primary question for this first section of whether we want to consider hiring a professional to help us. What I'm going to show you now is sort of our 3 campaigns in a very, very 10,000 feet up, high level perspective, and some of the distinctions between the 3. And my hope is that you'll be able to distill some principles for your conversations in your context. So just some key principles when you're running a capital campaign. This one sounds rather obvious, but you're going to have to ask. Churches don't like to ask for money. Preachers don't like to preach about money, even though Jesus talks about it more in the Gospel of Luke than he talks about prayer. So you're going to have to ask collectively, individually, repeatedly, with variety. A principle that we came across in our first campaign, which I held on to ever since, was the principle of equal sacrifice, not equal gifts. One of the things that churches with budgets like to do is say, we have a $200,000 budget, we have 100 members, and so if everybody just gave $2,000, we would meet our budget. So the idea being, we're going to do equal gifts. Well, a person with a 6-figure income versus a person who is on social disability, their capacity for giving is very, very different. And so we talked about equal sacrifice. And so the sacrifice of somebody with a 6-figure income versus the sacrifice of somebody on social disability, those can be equal, but the number will be very different when it comes out. So that principle of speaking to people's capacities as opposed to speaking to an equal amount. Over communicate the campaign. We say this all the time in all our contexts, but you cannot over communicate. Printed material, video, announcements, inserts in bulletins, social media posts, all of this. There's all kinds of ways to be communicating your campaign. invest in the communication tools, spend the money to create good material. It kind of ties back to the winning cause versus sinking ship. Am I going to give you a 5-figure donation if you can't print a brochure? You know, if you can't print a brochure, how are you going to build an elevator? So this is sort of the rationale. People put those together. Do you have the competence as an organization to make this happen? So invest in your communicating tools. Branding, how you tell the story, how you give the rationale and the reasoning behind your campaign. Base it in people, base it in principles. People don't care about square footage. They don't care about mortar. They don't care about, updating your knob and tube wiring. They do care about people. And if you can relate those things to people, you will inspire. Keep it positive, keep it celebratory, keep it looking ahead. We're back to the winning cause versus sinking ship conversation. I'm not going to give you a 5-figure donation if I think this isn't going to, if the church is going to close in 3 years, why am I giving, a big gift to put in an elevator? The quiet launch ahead of the public launch, I spoke to that earlier, but have your key leaders who are already having these conversations make their pledges ahead of time so that you start a campaign with momentum. So that by the time you get to a public launch, it's almost over. It's a celebration, it's a culmination, not the beginning of a campaign, even though to the church it looks like the beginning. You're at the end, you're collecting pledge cards at that point. You've done all, 90% of the campaign has happened before you get to your public launch. And then just because I can't say it enough, keep it about people, keep it about ministry. So I'll show you a little bit about how it worked for Chippewa. Our very first campaign, you heard me speak last week, it had a lot, to do with our facility, accessibility for washrooms, accessibility into the building, visual accessibility in the sanctuary, having enough space for our children to meet. And we realized that we had this list that was gigantic of things that if we tried to address them individually, we'd just never get it done. And it would open up a Pandora's box of other things that needed to be addressed. So our first campaign was called, in that theme, Opening the Doors. Accessibility, access, but also our values of hospitality, of invitation, of sort of friendship even. So we had things to do. We did our research, we got congregational feedback on architectural plans. We hired a campaign consultant. We created branding, published an engaging campaign summary. We gave continual updates, inserts in bulletins, announcements, booklets, home mailings. We did our quiet launch. This particular campaign fundraiser encouraged an every home visitation. And so we recruited about 25 people and sent them out into all of our congregation to do an every home visitation that included an ask. We did one-on-one visitations with people we thought might be major donors. And this campaign consultant sent the minister. So Doug had to learn how to sit in a living room and ask for large amounts of money, which I don't think I've ever been more uncomfortable in my life, but I've learned to do it. And then all of that work sort of culminated into a gala banquet. We went off-site, we rented a hall, it was like a giant wedding, and we announced our quiet launch amount that was being raised. We encouraged people to hand in pledge cards at that event. And it was fantastic. We had so much fun. We celebrated, and it was just a beautiful, beautiful time together. And people were really pumped, and it created positive energy for the life of our congregation. Just a little point about branding. Find a theme for your capital campaign. What we did was we leveraged our existing identity. If you look in that photo at the left of the banner, there's sort of 4 people around a cross. That logo had been present at Chippewa Presbyterian Church since the 70s. And so I leveraged that into the Mark II story of the 4 friends who pull off the roof in order to get their paralytic friend in front of Jesus. Access, hospitality, getting people in front of Jesus. And so opening the doors connected to our existing logo. This is who we've always been. 4 friends together, getting people to the cross in front of Jesus. And boy, did that make for easy preaching. And it made for easy storytelling. Why are we doing this? Well, and then, you start talking about the people who are gaining access. And so we called it opening the doors. We had some creative types. I don't know if you recognize those colors. Tim Hortons in the mid 2000s, right? Community, coffee shop, friendship, all of those images were what we tried to create. Our consultant, when he saw it, he's like, this looks like Tim Hortons. And he wasn't impressed, but then we're like, we nailed it. Like, that's exactly what we want, is that sense of Canadian community and stuff. So it was an embodiment of our identity and our values. And then part of our campaign, we had the largest reception into membership that Chippewa had ever had. 18 people joined the church inside of this campaign, opening the doors. Right? It's positive, it's momentum. It's like we have things that we're looking ahead to. Here's a sample page from within the material itself, from the campaign material. Again, that one word, access. And there's Bob, and Bob's in his wheelchair. He's in his wheelchair for this photo. And Bob gave us a quote. We put it into the campaign material, and we named the things that we were addressing with the capital campaign. And you can see I'm still using the mark passage. To the right is a booklet that we sent out to every home. It was about, I think it's about 12 to 14 pages with all of the material, frequently asked questions, architectural plans, why we're doing it, what's left to be done. All the questions that I would hear made it into that booklet. So again, over communicating. So we completed our renovation. Shovel went in the ground in 2010. We had 600,000, just over 600,000 pledged, which, if you recall, that's 3 times annual budget. So a strong campaign. We then were left with a mortgage just under $900,000. And there's a picture of our renovated sanctuary. See how nice and clean and bright and accessible that became. We left some traditional elements in there just to remind us where we came from. One of the other principles we kept in place was keeping the mortgage separate from the annual budget in our financial statements. So what was pledged, what was in the capital campaign was kept on a separate spreadsheet, separate lines than annual budget, so that we could see that ministry was still different than mortgage. So that led us to our second campaign. So all the 600,000 came in, and we're now in a new facility, and it's 2011, and we still have $900,000 owing and in a mortgage. A positive factor is we have an existing group of committed donors, people that gave the first time. And all those previous principles that we discussed remain in place. But now we're in what I call a monotonous middle mortgage. It is not fun, and it's hard to be motivating to get people excited about paying down a mortgage. Again, it's a Ken and Callahan statement, but if you talk about the mortgage a lot, all you're doing is reminding people of their own mortgage and frightening them to, it's like, oh, we need to pay this down. It's like, I need to pay down mine, right? So it's not great motivation. So here's a counterintuitive principle: broaden your campaign. All we needed to do was pay down the mortgage. We actually broadened the campaign, and we added a people ministry component to the middle campaign. We decided to create an endowment at that point in our ministry, we had a lot of young people that were going off for 6-month mission trips, going to Uganda, going to Vietnam, going around the world with YWAM, like just doing all kinds of different mission work. We had teams that were going to Nicaragua on short-term mission work, like a lot of people that were developing and growing. And so we said that 15% of everything raised is going to go into what we called a Raising the Future endowment. That gave us our people principle. That gave us our leverage to have something to be excited about, that was forward-looking, that was ministry-based, and wasn't just the mortgage. We had to have a conversation about whether we would hire a campaign consultant again. We brought the fellow in that had run our first campaign, and we said, what will you do in the second campaign that you didn't do in the first? We all know that the second campaign is more challenging than the first campaign because it's mortgage and not facility. So knowing that, what are you going to do? And he had nothing different to offer. So it's like, well, we're going to take that money and put it toward the mortgage. Thanks so much. And we ran it ourselves. He had taught us a fair bit, and there was, we kept asking. It was one of those moments at an interview where it's like you're in the press corps of a politician's announcement. You're asking the question, you're not getting the answer. And it's like you ask it again, you're still not getting. It's like, all right, he doesn't have an answer. So, and so that's when we made the decision to do our own. We shaped this campaign a little bit differently. Some things stayed the same. So there's our Raising the Future. We had lots of pictures of young people in different parts of the world being engaged. And again, testimonies from those people as part of our campaign. This is where it got a little bit different. We gave it a thank you focus. Because we knew we already had a group of donors, basically what we were doing was asking them to do it again. So we wanted to say thank you for fulfilling their pledges for the first 3 years. We wanted to celebrate those pledges. And we wanted it to be more personal than a gala or a thank you note or a phone call. Like, we wanted something that had a sense of different and oh, isn't this special component to it. So the idea we came up with, and I'm not recommending this, I'm just telling the story. We had dinner at the minister's home for all the donors who had given in the first campaign. I made dinner. I made roast. I made pie. And we brought people in sort of 8 to 10 at a time over a period of a month. And so I did 10 dinners. I cooked. And we sat down together, and at that table, I would say, thank you. And here's our material. And would you do it again? And they're still talking about it, right? The minister did it. And I had, 2 or 3 people that would help me, sort of sous chefs, not food prep, but clean up in the kitchen. And that was the campaign. Those that couldn't make it to my house for dinner, we had an open house at the church with food, and people could drop in and mingle around. And that was a place for our new donors as well. So what you're looking at on the right there is the list of invitations and the dates of people being at my house for dinner. So on this one, our results were smaller, which is typical of a second campaign. 400,000 was pledged. But we also created an endowment, Raising the Future endowment of $60,000, which Chippewa now uses to sponsor people that want to go on a short-term mission trip, who want to, youth that are doing a 6-month YWAM type of thing, Nicaragua trips, this kind of thing. So it's really, really great. Another difference in our second campaign is we had a major donor in the first campaign that said, this is my donation for the whole thing. So that amount didn't get recorded into the second campaign. So the church stayed strong. Which brings us to the third campaign. We had a pause. We coasted for a couple of years. So 2011 to 2014 was the campaign. People, our treasurer calls it the halo effect. People didn't necessarily drop off with their giving. Hey, my 3 years are up and I stopped. People mostly just continued. But then we ran into a situation where we had a flat roof that wasn't part of the original renovation that needed to be replaced, and flat roofs are stupid expensive. So it's like, oh, great. Now we got to come up with 50 grand. Well, if we're going to come up with 50 grand, we might as well see if we can finish off the mortgage. That's sort of the conversation that happened for this third campaign. Third campaign has a finish line motivation to it. It's like, oh, we can get this done. We can get the monkey off our back. We can, celebrate a job well done. We built this one on a theme of legacy and ministry positioned for the future. The story we told was the fact that, we were in a building for many years that the generation ahead of us had provided. And they were in a building the generation ahead of them had provided. And so we told the story of, we want to be the generation that provides for the next chapter. And so that's why we called it Building Legacy. And Karen's going to recognize the image we stole immediately. This is from the planned giving materials of the PCC. And this idea of the dandelion releasing seeds completely captured the motivation and the story we wanted to tell. We showed the facilities in the various iterations from our 200 years, and used scripture. One generation commends your works to another. So it's like, we are going to be the generation that sets it up for the next generation. But we kept it about people, not buildings. So all of these individuals, anybody in the church would look at those people and see a dandelion seed, so to speak. Some of them are young, some of them are seniors. We have Habitat for Humanity builds, we have food bank support, we have Sunday school students, we had vacation Bible school, youth that were in Africa, mission teams, all of this being the seeds of the legacy that we're building. So the facility was the dandelion, the seeds are the... we included, Chippewa has sent a number of people into vocational ministry over the years. We have a school in Nicaragua that is supported, so this raising people up into their faith as well. So we crossed the finish line. The mortgage was retired in 2022. 1.62 million was raised. It took us 14 years to do it. 200,000 of that was interest costs, but also in there was an HST rebate from the renovation, which was substantial, very helpful. We trained our church in generosity. Ministry never stopped. We continued sending out short-term mission teams. They raised substantial amounts of money while these things were happening. More generates more. It's sort of counterintuitive. People think that if you are giving with the right hand, the left hand's going to take it back, but it's actually just more giving and more giving and more giving and more generosity that happens. So our annual budget wasn't negatively impacted. I love this picture. That is our treasurer, Doris Eaglesham. But we have pictures of her dad in the early 70s burning a previous mortgage. So again, this theme of building legacy of generation to generation, we just leveraged that to the hilt, and this one really makes me smile. And then finally, just some general learning points. Just a reminder, each of our campaign had a sort of different focus, different focal point, different story, and that allowed for different entry points for people that are new to the congregation. People that have been in your congregation for 50 years, they're committed. What about somebody that's been there for 5 years? You know, why should I give a substantial gift to a place that I've only been here for 5 years? We kept our mortgage separate from our annual budget. We kept it out of the line items, and that kept it in front of us, kept us mindful that it existed. We had an existing endowment, that portion of which we could designate to sort of capital costs, repairs, that kind of thing. And so we used that against principal payments, as principal payments, or to pay it down a little quicker. We also use those funds to facilitate the consultant to facilitate the costs of some of our printed materials, that kind of thing. So we leveraged resources that we already had to strengthen our campaigns. I'd encourage you to have a mortgage champion in the church, somebody that's always like, hey, you know, remember this, and let's try and get this done. And then that halo effect of giving in between campaigns is something that was very helpful to us as well. If you would like, I tried to go a little quicker, but I have a video that I can show that we showed at our last gala dinner for the last financial campaign that I think sort of epitomizes catching the theme, leveraging the people versus square footage kind of thing. So if you're interested, we're approaching time, but it's 3.5 minutes.
No, let's go ahead. I see some
Okay.
nodding heads, so let's
Okay.
watch it and then we'll have
All
a
right.
conversation.
Okay, I'm going to switch screens here. So for context, I want you to imagine us, we're sort of at the culmination of our third campaign. We've set up a catered dinner in the sanctuary with previous donors and those who are interested in attending. You're going to see us try and tell the story of one generation sharing to the next and leveraging that idea of we are raising up people for mission and ministry for Christ's kingdom into the future. So with that in mind, and with the recognition that everybody sitting in that sanctuary will have some awareness of the faces that you're going to see. So just let yourself imagine that as well.
There is a house built out of stone, wooden floors, walls, and window sills, tables and chairs warmed by all of the dust. This is a place where I don't feel this is a place where I feel at home. I
So again, that idea of, you know, are we excited? Are we motivating? Are we inspired? Are we, you know, what is it that we're being asked to give generously to? And that was a chance for us to tell our story toward the end of all the work that we had done, yet continuing to look forward.
Great, thanks, Doug. I think if anyone has some questions, we're just open for a conversation now.
Doug, can I just ask what song that was? That was beautiful.
You know what? I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I could find out for you.
Thank you.
I think it does. I always like, and it doesn't have to be perfect, you know, as long as the photos are real and some good music. Photos say 1,000 words, like they really do convey a lot. And it was nice to wrap up the webinar, but also, you know, just I can imagine to give people a feeling like, wow, this is what we've done and what we've experienced.
And those are all people we knew. Right. So you saw the picture of Doris shredding the mortgage at the end of my PowerPoint. That was her dad. We all knew that. And so you know, I still get goose flesh when I see that, knowing that the legacy of the church is continuing to move forward and be built. And Doris's son made that video. So there's 3 you know, so we all knew that, which sort of pumps us up.
Does anyone have any comments or experiences they want to share that the group may find interesting, or questions?
No, it's very inspiring what you guys did, Doug. It's very inspirational, and I like the way you wrapped it up with that video showing the history of your successes over all the years. That's very important to show.
Doug, did you ever get comfortable with the ask?
I'm still not.
Yeah.
It's when I was able to enter into my own material that we had created together. Mark II, as opening the doors, that was my courage, I think, is no, this is biblical. I want to be that fourth friend that helps tear off the roof. And if that means sitting in a living room and, hey, can you give us, and actually it was never us, it was, would you be willing to give out of your faith to your church for this purpose? And when I got my head around those things, my courage did develop. But believing in what we were doing was where that came from.
That sounds great. And one thing I want to also add about asking is, if you don't ask, the answer's automatically no.
Or somebody else will ask and get in line ahead of you. So.
Oh, that's true. Yes.
Doug, what did, in terms of stewardship or talking about money, did it help impact the annual budget, or did people get more comfortable with that? Or was the church already fairly comfortable with sort of the encouraging giving to the annual budget?
Right. We built a culture of generosity. It became part of the discipleship work, to the point where we just became supremely confident if there was a need. When we did I told you about the $50,000 for the flat roof at the beginning of the 2018 campaign. That was sort of the prompt, because we had been drifting for a little bit. It's like, all right, let's get this mortgage finished and we need some money for the flat roof. And we had it in like 6 weeks. Like, people were like, okay. And it was, it got to be very, very easy. But that was after sort of 15 years of, you know, I would teach a series on money every year, because again, the courage came from reading Luke, listening to Jesus interact with people. Money is a counterfeit God. It mimics all the things God gives us, from living beyond us to fulfillment of promises to a sense of security. money tries to bump God out of God's place. And so I was happy to preach those kinds of sermons. And it's like, you know what, open your hand so that you're not tight-fisted with what God has put there. And you know, we you saw a photo of one of our fellows at a Grand Prix Project Share. That was a food bank local fundraiser. Different organizations would send a go-kart racing team to this event. And I would just say to the church, let's be the organization that wins this every year with most pledges. And every year we were in it, we won, to the point where other teams are like, oh, the church is here, you know. And it's like, that's the story I want told in our community.
Great. Any other questions? Well, thank you. You've been a great small group, and we were glad to see that you all turned up again, and we even got somebody new. And this is a great resource that I think other churches that are looking to do capital campaigns, we can point them to as well. So again, feel free to share the recording with anyone who you think might find it helpful. And if you've got questions, feel free to ask any of the Stewardship Plan Giving staff, or you can contact Doug directly as well.
By all means.
Actually, I'm going to ask Doug, will you close us in prayer?
I would be flattered. Thank you.
Thanks.
God, you are good. You are generous. You have given your church the privilege of joining you in your mission of reaching the world with the good news of Jesus Christ. We thank you for honoring us in that way. God, we want to do a good job for you and for your kingdom. And we pray that as you place resources into our care, as you place people into our path, that you would give us the wisdom and the courage to leverage all that you've given us, both in terms of practical facilities and resources, but also in dreams of ways we can be witnesses to your goodness, that you would help us to always be willing to take steps of initiative and of courage to try the things that you are tapping us on the shoulder about. God, I pray for those who are in this virtual room. God, you have inspired them and placed things on their hearts for their facilities, for their ministries. And I pray that out of our conversations over these past 2 weeks, that they would feel themselves inspired and emboldened and encouraged to take continuing steps to see you move in and through their congregations. Thank you for the PCC, for Karen and Jim and the team of support that are behind them, and for their ability and willingness to resource us as a church so that we might, again, be better prepared to further your kingdom. Help us to have the joy of seeing you at work in us and through us. Give us the wisdom to pay attention for those moments. And we pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 Thank you. Thank you,
Well,
everyone.
thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure to spend some time with you, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Doug.
Bye.
Thank you, Douglas.